The Valorian Dominion had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Their empire stretched across 400 star systems, and they believed themselves to be the greatest civilization in the entire galaxy. Every species they had ever encountered had either bent the knee or been crushed into dust. This was simply how things worked. The strong ruled. The weak served. There was no other way. High Archon Veltaris sat upon his throne made of crystal and bone. Listening to reports from his countless worlds, he was old by Valorian standards, nearly 800 years, but his mind remained sharp and his cruelty remained sharper. He had personally ordered the destruction of 17 civilizations during his reign. Each time he felt nothing but mild satisfaction, like a gardener pulling weeds, when his scouts first detected strange signals coming from a small yellow star in a quiet corner of the galaxy. Veltaris barely noticed. The signals were primitive. Radio waves. Electromagnetic noise. The species sending them had clearly only recently discovered technology. They were infants playing with fire. But then the humans launched their first ship beyond their own solar system. It was a small vessel, unmanned, carrying only cameras and sensors. It moved slowly through the void, taking pictures of distant stars. To the humans, it was a triumph. To the Valorians, it was an insult. These creatures dared to reach toward the stars without permission. They dared to dream of exploration without first asking their betters. Veltaris dispatched an envoy fleet. 40 warships, each one capable of destroying a planet. They arrived in the human solar system and immediately broadcast their demands on every frequency. Primitive species of the third planet, the message began. You have been noticed by the Valorian Dominion. You will submit to our rule. You will provide tribute in the form of resources and labor. You will accept your place as servants of the greater civilization. Resistance is not merely futile. It is impossible. You have 10 of your planetary rotations to send representatives to accept these terms. Failure to comply will result in your extinction. The message was standard. The Valorians had sent it 937 times before 2 different species. The response was always the same. Fear, panic, desperate attempts to negotiate, and finally, complete surrender. Humanity's response was different. A woman appeared on the communication screen. She was small by Valorian standards, with dark hair and darker eyes. She wore a simple uniform, and she was smiling. Her name was Director Alina Vasquez, and she led something called the United Earth Diplomatic Corps. Thank you for your message, she said calmly. Earth's government has received your terms. We would like to request additional time to discuss them among ourselves. We would also like to propose an alternative arrangement. Rather than a relationship of dominance and submission, we suggest a partnership of equals. We have much we could learn from each other. The Valorian ambassador stared at the screen in disbelief. This creature was not afraid. She was not begging. She was negotiating, as if she had any power to do so. You do not seem to understand your situation, the ambassador replied. You have no choice in this matter. Director Vasquez's smile did not waver. Everyone has choices. We are simply asking you to consider better ones. The negotiations continued for 8 days. Humanity asked questions about Valorian culture, their history, their technology. They seemed genuinely curious. They also seemed completely unwilling to accept anything less than equal treatment. Every demand was met with a polite counterproposal. Every threat was acknowledged and then ignored. High Archon, Veltaris received daily reports of these conversations. At first he found them amusing, then annoying, then infuriating. These humans had no army capable of fighting the Dominion. They had no ships that could challenge even a single Valorian cruiser. And yet they spoke as if they were equals. On the 9th day, he made his decision. It's enough, he said to his council. These creatures need to learn fear. Send the eternal supremacy. Have them demonstrate the consequences of defiance. The Eternal Supremacy was one of the largest warships in the Valorian fleet. It carried a weapon called a graviton lance, capable of cracking a moon in half with a single shot. Its captain received his orders with a cruel smile. the humans had colonies on several moons in their outer solar system. The largest was on a frozen world called Europa. 3 million humans lived there, working in research facilities and mining operations. They had built homes there, raised families, created communities. The Eternal Supremacy arrived in orbit around Europa at 0342 hours. Earth's Standard Time. The colonists detected the massive ship and sent panicked messages to Earth. They had 5 minutes of warning. 5 minutes to feel terror, to say goodbye to loved ones, to pray to whatever gods they believed in. At 0347 hours, the graviton lance fired. The weapon struck Europa with the force of a dying star. The moon's icy surface shattered. Massive cracks spread across the entire world. Research stations were crushed. Underground cities collapsed. The ocean beneath the ice boiled and then froze. Again, instantly. 3 million humans died in less than 30 seconds. High Archon, Veltora sent his message immediately. His image appeared on every screen on Earth. This was a warning, he said, his voice calm and cold. A demonstration of what awaits those who defy the Dominion. Your colony on Europa is gone. 3 million of your kind are dead. This is the price of your arrogance. You now have 30 rotations to accept our original terms. If you do not, we will do the same to your homeworld. But we will take our time with Earth. We will make you watch as we destroy your cities one by one. We will let you count the dead. And when only a handful of you remain, we will offer you the chance to serve. Consider carefully. He ended the transmission and leaned back in his throne. He expected to receive humanity's surrender within hours, perhaps days at most. He had seen this happen hundreds of times. The shock, the grief, the realization of helplessness. Soon, the humans would beg for mercy. He waited. 1 day passed. Then 2, then 3. Earth sent no messages. No surrender. No pleas. No threats. Nothing at all. The silence was absolute. Valteris felt something he had not experienced in centuries. It took him a moment to recognize the emotion because it was so unfamiliar. It was the first faint stirring of doubt. What were the humans doing? Why were they not responding? Every species he had ever crushed had reacted with noise, chaos, desperation. But Earth was quiet, dark. Still, he told himself it did not matter. He had the largest fleet in the galaxy. He had weapons that could burn worlds. Whatever the humans were planning, it would fail. It had to fail. He was wrong. On Earth, the world had stopped. When news of Europa reached the surface, there was no panic, no riots, no chaos. Instead, something strange and terrible happened. Humanity went quiet. Every screen showed the same images. The broken moon. The debris field. The final messages from colonists who knew they were about to die. A mother had recorded herself singing to her infant daughter in the last moments. A scientist had transmitted his final research data, apologizing that he could not finish his work. A teenage boy had sent a message to his father on Earth, telling him not to be sad, telling him to remember the good times. 8 billion humans watched these messages. 8 billion hearts broke at the same moment. And then, something unexpected happened. Old enemies looked at each other and saw only fellow humans. Nations that had threatened war the week before suddenly found their conflicts meaningless. Political leaders who had spent careers attacking each other stood together in silence. Religious differences, cultural disputes, ancient hatreds, all of it fell away like dust in the wind. For the first time in human history, the entire species felt the same emotion at the same moment. Grief, and beneath the grief something harder, something colder. Something that had driven humanity through ice ages and famines and wars and plagues. The will to survive, and the determination to make their enemies pay. The United Earth Council met an emergency session. Every nation sent representatives. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, a single order was given to Admiral James Chen, the commander of Earth's Space Defense Force. Whatever it takes. Admiral Chen was 63 years old. He had spent his entire career preparing for a war he hoped would never come. He had studied military history obsessively. He knew how humans fought when their backs were against the wall. He knew what his species was capable of when pushed too far. He also knew something that the Valorians did not 50 years ago. The first human expedition to Mars had discovered something buried beneath the red sand. Ancient ruins. Technology that should not exist. Records and languages that took decades to translate. The remains of a civilization that had called themselves the precursors, the first spacefaring species in the galaxy, who had risen and fallen 2 billion years before the first dinosaur walked on Earth. The precursors had left behind knowledge, weapons, engines that could fold, space like paper, energy sources that burned with the power of stars, shields that could stop anything, and a warning carved in stone in every language they knew. Others will come. They will see your weakness and try to destroy you. Do not let them. We failed. You must not. For 50 years, humanity had studied this knowledge in secret. They had built ships in hidden facilities. They had trained crews in classified bases. They had prepared for a day they hoped would never arrive. That day had arrived in underground hangars on Earth, the dark side of the moon. In asteroid bases scattered through the solar system, lights flickered on. Engines that had never been tested in combat began to hum. Crews, who had trained in simulation for decades, finally boarded real ships. The human fleet awakened. Director Elena Vasquez had not slept since Europa died. She had spent every hour coordinating with military commanders, government leaders, and scientists. Now, on the 7th day of silence, she sat down to compose humanity's response. She wrote 12 drafts. Each one was too long, too emotional, too human. The Valorians would not understand grief or rage. They only understood power. So she stripped her message down to its essence. On the 8th day, she transmitted it on every frequency the Valorians were monitoring. It was a single sentence. Europa has been avenged. Your empire has 96 hours to exist. Use them wisely. In the throne room of the Valorian homeworld, High Archon Velturus read the message 3 times. Then he laughed. He laughed so hard that tears ran down his face. His advisors joined him, their cruel laughter echoing off the ancient walls. They threaten us, Velturus said. These insects threaten the Dominion. They have nothing. They are nothing. This is the desperate bluster of a dying species. His name was Scholar Kethvin, and he was the oldest member of the council. He had studied primitive species for 3 centuries. He knew something the others did not. High Archon, he said quietly. I recommend caution. Velturus stopped laughing. Caution? Against humans? They did not beg, Kethvon said. When we killed 3 million of their kind, they did not surrender. They did not even respond for 7 days. Every other species we have conquered reacted with immediate terror. The humans reacted with silence. That silence concerns me. You are old and frightened, Velturus replied. The silence means nothing. They were simply too shocked to respond. Perhaps, Kethvin said. Or perhaps they were preparing. Velturus waved his hand dismissively. Preparing what? They have no weapons that can touch us. Our scouts have mapped their entire solar system. They have a handful of patrol ships and some orbital stations. Nothing more. Our scouts found nothing, Kethvin agreed. But that does not mean nothing exists. The humans are clever. They have survived countless extinction events on their own world. They have a long history of hiding their true capabilities until the moment of attack. I have studied their wars. They are not like other species. They are patient, and they are dangerous. Velturus stood from his throne. Enough. I will hear no more of this cowardice. Order the Grand Fleet to mobilize. 6,000 ships. We will go to the human system ourselves. We will burn their planet to ash and scatter their remains across the void. And every species in the galaxy will see what happens to those who dare to threaten the Dominion. The order went out. Across 400 systems, Valorian warships began to move. It was the largest military mobilization in 10,000 years. On Earth. Admiral Chen watched the sensor data with cold satisfaction. The Valorians were coming. Good. That meant humanity would not have to chase them. He turned to his officers, signaled the fleet. It's time. One by one, human warships began to emerge from their hiding places. They moved through fold space, the precursor engines bending reality around them. They were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, sleek and angular, radiating power that made sensors malfunction. 247 ships. Against an empire of 400 systems, it should have been hopeless. It should have been suicide. But the humans were not afraid. They carried within them the names of 3 million dead. They carried the memory of Europa. They carried the cold, patient fury of a species that had finally found something worth dying for, and something worth killing for. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship. The Aegis Terra's vengeance. He looked at the stars through the viewing screen. Somewhere out there, the Valorians were gathering their forces. Confident in their inevitable victory, they had no idea what was coming. All ships, Chen said quietly. Begin the operation, and may God forgive us for what we are about to do. The human fleet vanished into fold space, racing toward the first target. The war for the galaxy had begun. Kethros Station hung in the darkness between stars. It was the largest military base in the Valorian Dominion's forward operations sector, home to 800 warships and 50,000 soldiers. For 1,000 years, it had served as the launching point for countless conquests. Species that saw its shadow in their skies knew that their freedom was already lost. Commander Vexrel stood on the station's observation deck, watching his fleet patrol the surrounding space. He had received word of the human threat, but he was not concerned. 800 ships. The finest weapons in the Dominion. Even if the humans somehow possessed a fleet of their own, they would be crushed like every other primitive species before them. His sensors officer interrupted his thoughts. Commander, we are detecting unusual energy signatures at the edge of the system. Vexrel turned slowly. Unusual how? I do not know how to describe them, Commander. They are not matching any known signatures in our database. The readings are simply wrong. Before Vexrel could respond, space itself seemed to tear open. 200 human warships emerged from fold space in perfect formation, surrounding Kethros Station on all sides. They appeared simultaneously, without warning, without any of the usual signs of faster-than-light travel. One moment, empty space. The next, an armada. Vexrel stared at the tactical display. The human ships were beautiful in a terrifying way. Their hulls seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. Energy readings pulsed from them in patterns that made his experienced officers whisper prayers to ancient gods. Impossible, he said. This is impossible. Where did they get these ships? A communication signal cut through all channels. A human female appeared on every screen in the station. This is Captain Sarah Okonkwo of the Earth Defense Ship Remembrance to Kethros Station and all Valorian vessels. You have 5 minutes to evacuate all personnel to escape pods. We will not fire on unarmed vessels. After 5 minutes, your station will be destroyed. This is your only warning. The woman's face showed no emotion. Her eyes were steady and cold. Vexrel noticed something about her expression, the look of someone who had lost everything and no longer feared anything. He laughed, more from disbelief than amusement. Do they truly believe 200 ships can defeat 800? Open fire. All batteries. Destroy these insects. 800 Valorian warships responded instantly. Thousands of weapons fired at once. Energy beams and missiles and graviton lances filled the void with destruction. Not a single shot hit its target. The human ships simply moved. But they did not move like normal ships. They flickered, jumping instantly from one position to another without crossing the space in between. Weapons passed harmlessly through empty space, where targets had been a heartbeat before. Captain Okonkwo watched the incoming fire miss completely. The precursor engines allowed something that no other technology could achieve: instantaneous repositioning within a localized area. The Valorians were firing at ghosts. Our turn, she said quietly. All ships, engage. What happened next would be remembered in Valorian. Nightmares for generations. The human weapons were unlike anything in the galaxy. Ships fired beams that seemed to erase matter from existence rather than destroy it. Valorian cruisers simply vanished, leaving behind not even debris. Missiles that released bursts of temporal energy aged enemy vessels thousands of years in seconds, crumbling them to ancient dust. Shields that had never been breached by any enemy failed instantly against weapons that attacked the fundamental structure of reality itself. The battle lasted 11 minutes when it ended. The 800 ships of Kethros Station were gone. Not retreated. Not scattered. Gone. The station itself was a shattered ruin, survivors fleeing in escape pods that the humans did indeed let pass unharmed. Commander Vexral was among the survivors. He sat in his escape pod, staring at nothing, trying to understand what had just happened. His entire fleet, destroyed in minutes by an enemy that should not exist. The human fleet did not celebrate. There was no cheering on the remembrance. Captain Okonkwo simply nodded and gave her next order. Kethros is neutralized. Proceeding to secondary targets. On the Valorian homeworld, the first reports arrive like hammer blows. High Archon, Velterus stood in his war room, surrounded by tactical displays showing the impossible. Kethros Station, destroyed. The defense fleet, annihilated. Human ships moving in ways that violated every known law of physics. Weapons that his scientists could not even begin to explain. This cannot be correct, he said. Run the analysis again. You've run it 17 times. High Archon. The data is accurate. Scholar Kethvon stood in the corner, saying nothing. But his expression spoke volumes. I warned you. More reports flooded in. Human strike forces were appearing throughout the Dominion. Military outposts fell. Supply lines were cut. Communication arrays went silent. The humans were not simply attacking. They were systematically dismantling the infrastructure of the Empire, and they were doing it with terrifying efficiency. Velterus slammed his fist against the display console. How? These are primitives. They were using chemical rockets a century ago. Where did they get this technology? No one had an answer. On the remembrance, Captain Okonkwo received a message from Admiral Chen. New orders. She read them and felt something stir in her chest. Not quite satisfaction, but close. The human fleet was regrouping. Intel had located the Valorian Grand Fleet in the Valoran Nebula. 6,000 ships, commanded by the High Archon himself. The largest gathering of military power in the galaxy. The humans were going to meet them. Okonkwo called her crew together. They stood in the ship's main hall, 300 men and women from every nation on Earth. Some had lost family on Europa. Others had simply volunteered because they believed in the mission. All of them knew that the next battle would determine the fate of their species. I am not going to give you a speech about glory or honor, Okonkwo said. We all know why we are here. We all carry the same weight. 3 million names. 3 million reasons. Tomorrow, we face the entire Valorian Empire. They think they are fighting for conquest. We know we are fighting for survival. That difference matters. She paused, looking at each face in turn. Valorians have never met anything like us. They have never faced a species that refuses to surrender. They have never encountered enemies who would rather die than kneel. Tomorrow, we show them what that means. Tomorrow, we show the entire galaxy what happens when you push humanity too far. The crew did not cheer. They simply nodded. They understood. That night, Captain Okonkwo sat alone in her quarters. She looked at a photograph on her desk. A young woman's face, smiling. Her daughter Maya, who had been studying marine biology on Europa, who had dreamed of discovering new life in the moon's hidden oceans, who had died without ever hurting anyone. Okonkwo touched the photograph gently. Tomorrow, she whispered, I will make them answer for you. I promise. She did not sleep. She did not need to. The cold fire burning inside her was all the energy she required. At dawn, the human fleet jumped to the Valoran Nebula. 300 ships, against 6,000. The final battle was about to begin. The Valoran. Nebula burned with the light of dying stars. Clouds of gas and dust painted the void in shades of crimson and gold, creating a backdrop of terrible beauty. It was here that High Archon Valteris had gathered the full might of the Valorian dominion. 6,000 warships hung in perfect formation. Dreadnoughts the size of mountains, carriers that birthed swarms of fighter craft, destroyers bristling with weapons, and at the center of it all, the Imperial flagship Eternal Dominion. The largest vessel ever built by Valorian hands, Valteris stood on the command deck, watching his fleet through massive viewing windows. This was the culmination of 12,000 years of conquest. No force in the galaxy could stand against such power. The humans would be crushed. Their defiance would become a lesson for every other species foolish enough to challenge Valorian supremacy. High Archon, his sensor officer, reported. Human fleet emerging from fold space. Bearing 7 Mark III. Valteris smiled. How many? 312 vessels, High Archon. The smile widened. 300 against 6,000. They truly are insane. The human fleet appeared in a burst of light. They emerged in a single wave, taking position at the edge of weapons range. The sleek, dark ships seemed small against the vast Valorian armada. Small and hopelessly outnumbered, Admiral James Chen stood on the bridge of the Terra's Vengeance, studying the enemy formation. His tactical officers were feeding him data, but he barely needed it. He had wargamed this scenario 1,000 times in simulation. He knew what had to be done. Open a channel, he said. All frequencies. His image appeared on every screen in the Valorian fleet. This is Admiral James Chen of the Earth Defense Fleet 2 High Archon. Valteris. I am authorized to offer you terms. Surrender yourself to stand trial for the destruction of Europa. Order your fleet to stand down. Accept a treaty of non-aggression and pay reparations to the families of the victims. Do this, and no more blood needs to be shed. On the Eternal Dominion, Valteris laughed out loud. His entire bridge crew joined him. You offer me terms? Valteris replied. You stand before the greatest fleet ever assembled with barely a handful of ships, and you dare to demand my surrender? Human, you will die here today. Your species will be erased from existence, and I will personally ensure that not even a memory of you remains. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. He had expected nothing less. So be it, he said. What happens next is on your conscience. Valteris ended the communication with a contemptuous gesture. All ships, attack formation. Kill them all. 6,000 ships moved as one. Weapons charged. Fighters launched. The void filled with the light of approaching death. Admiral Chen watched the incoming storm with calm eyes. All ships, execute pattern Omega. Weapons free. The Battle of Valoran began. The human fleet split into 12 strike groups, each one moving with perfect coordination. They did not charge toward the enemy or attempt to form defensive lines. Instead, they began to dance. The precursor engines allowed the human ships to jump instantaneously within local space. They appeared, fired, and vanished before counterattacks could reach them. A human cruiser would emerge inside a Valorian formation, launch a spread of temporal missiles, and disappear before the explosions even finished. Destroyers flickered through the enemy fleet like ghosts, leaving trails of destruction in their wake. The Valorians had never faced anything like this. Their training was based on normal combat, where ships moved through space in predictable ways, against enemies who could be anywhere at any moment. Their tactics were useless. Within the first hour, 700 Valorian ships were destroyed. Valteris watched the carnage with growing horror. His commanders screamed for orders, but there were no orders to give. How did you fight shadows? How did you defeat enemies who simply refused to be where your weapons were pointed? Concentrate fire on their flagship, he commanded. All weapons, target the Terra's Vengeance. 1,000 ships turned their guns toward Admiral Chen's vessel, enough firepower to crack a planet. Enough destructive power to end any battle? The Terra's Vengeance did not run. It did not hide. Instead, It flew directly toward the incoming barrage. "Admiral," his tactical officer said nervously, "they have locked on." Chen nodded. "I know. Activate the Absolute Zero Lance." At the heart of the human flagship, a weapon powered by precursor technology came to life. It was not simply a gun. It was something far more terrifying. A device that targeted the fundamental bonds of matter and energy, unmaking them at the quantum level. Anything caught in its beam did not merely die, it ceased to have ever existed. The beam fired. A line of absolute darkness cut through the Valorian fleet. Ships touched by it simply vanished, erased from reality, without leaving behind even debris. The beam swept through the attacking formation. And where 1,000 ships had been, there was only empty void. Silence fell across the Valorian command channel. For the first time in their species' history, the Valorians knew true fear. "What? What is that weapon?" Velterus whispered. No one answered. No one could. The battle continued for 3 more hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The human fleet systematically dismantled the Valorian armada. Strike groups targeted command ships, eliminating leadership. Support vessels were destroyed, cutting supply lines. Fighter carriers were priority targets, reducing air cover, and throughout it all, the humans never lost a single ship. Their technology was simply too advanced. Their tactics too refined. Their determination to absolute. They had spent 50 years preparing for this moment. And it showed in every maneuver, every shot, every decision. By the 4th hour, the Valorian Grand Fleet had ceased to exist. Of the 6,000 ships that had gathered in the Valoran Nebula, fewer than 200 survived. They fled in every direction, engines at maximum, abandoning their high Archon to save themselves. The pride of the Valorian Dominion had been reduced to scattered, broken survivors. Admiral Chen watched them run. He felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion and a cold sense of duty. "I signal all ships," he said. "Phase 2 begins now. Execute the infrastructure strikes." Now the human fleet divided. 40 strike groups jumped to predetermined targets across the Dominion. Not military targets. Not planetary populations. Instead, they struck at the systems that held the Empire together. Communication arrays that allowed faster-than-light messaging were destroyed. Shipyards that built warships were reduced to rubble. Resource processing stations that fueled the war machine were systematically eliminated. The humans did not seek to conquer the Dominion. They sought to break it. On dozens of Valorian colony worlds, subject species watched in amazement as their oppressors' infrastructure collapsed. Ships that had enforced tribute for centuries suddenly had nowhere to resupply, no way to coordinate. The iron grip of the Dominion began to crumble. High Archon Velterus fled to his homeworld in the only ship that remained to him. The Eternal Dominion had been damaged in the battle, barely able to limp home. He reached the palace that had stood for 12,000 years and sealed himself inside with his remaining guards. He watched through sensors as human ships peered in orbit around his world. They did not fire. They simply watched, waiting. Director Elena Vasquez's voice filled the throne room. She spoke calmly, without anger, without triumph. "Iarchon Velterus, your fleet is destroyed. Your empire is falling. Your subjects are already declaring independence. You have nothing left but this palace and your pride. We are offering you one final chance. Surrender yourself for trial. Face justice for what you did to Europa. If you do this, your people will be shown mercy. Your world will not be harmed. Your civilization will be allowed to continue. Refuse, and we will demonstrate what humanity is truly capable of. You have 6 hours to decide." The transmission ended. Velterus sat on his throne, surrounded by advisors who had no advice to give, guards who had no enemy to fight, and priests who had no prayers that could help. For the first time in his long life, the High Archon was completely alone with his choices. 6 hours passed in silence. High Archon Velterus sat on his throne as the time ran out. His advisors had begged him to surrender. His generals had pleaded. Even the priests had suggested that perhaps wisdom lay in accepting defeat. But Velturus was a creature of pride, forged in the fires of absolute power. Surrender was not something he could comprehend. When the deadline came, he rose from his throne and walked to the palace hangar. There his guards had prepared the last Imperial warship that remained functional. A cruiser, old but still dangerous. He boarded it with his most loyal soldiers. 300 warriors who would rather die than see their Archon humiliated. "We will not surrender to insects," Velturus announced over the ship's communication system. "We will not bow to creatures who should have been crushed beneath our boots. If this is the end of the Valorian dominion, then let it end in fire. Let it end in battle. Let history remember that we never knelt." The cruiser launched from the palace, climbing toward the human fleet in orbit. It was a single ship against hundreds. Suicide by any rational measure. But Velturus had stopped being rational the moment Europa fell and the humans refused to break. Captain Sarah Okonkwo was the first to detect the approaching vessel. "It is the High Archon's ship," her sensor officer reported. "He is ascending toward our position. Weapons are charging." Okonkwo nodded slowly. She understood what was happening. The Valorian leader was choosing death over surrender. It was almost admirable in a twisted way. Almost, she thought of Maya, her daughter's smile, the way she used to laugh when she discovered something new about the ocean creatures she studied, the way she had called every week, no matter how busy she was, just to hear her mother's voice. 3 million people had died. Because this creature thought he had the right to demonstrate his power. "Open a channel," Okonkwo said. Velturus appeared on her screen. His face was twisted with rage and desperation. Behind him, his crew worked frantically to prepare weapons that would never fire in time. "I am Captain Sarah Okonkwo of the EDS Remembrance," she said. "My daughter was on Europa. Her name was Maya. She was 23 years old. She wanted to discover new life in the universe. She wanted to understand things that no one had ever understood before. You killed her," Velturus sneered. "One insect among millions. Why should I care?" "You should not," Okonkwo replied calmly. "That is the point. You cannot even imagine caring. You cannot understand what you destroyed. That is why you lost. That is why you will always lose." She ended the communication. Fire. A single beam from the Remembrance struck the Valorian cruiser. The ship did not explode. It simply ended, erased from existence in a flash of impossible darkness. High Archon Velturus, ruler of 400 worlds, conqueror of civilizations, terror of the galaxy for 8 centuries, was gone. Okonkwo felt nothing. She had expected some sense of closure, some satisfaction. There was only emptiness. Vengeance could not bring Maya back. Nothing could, but at least it was finished. The death of the High Archon marked the official end of the Valorian dominion. Across 400 systems, the news spread like wildfire. Subject species who had been enslaved for millennia rose up against their weakened masters. Valorian governors fled or were overthrown. The empire that had seemed eternal crumbled in a matter of weeks. But humanity's true surprise came after the victory. Admiral Chen addressed the galaxy on all frequencies. His message was broadcast to every world, every species, every corner of known space. "The war's over," he said. "The Valorian dominion is finished. We have achieved what we set out to achieve. Justice for Europa, security for Earth, and a message to anyone who might consider attacking us in the future. But we did not fight this war to become conquerors ourselves. We did not sacrifice so much just to replace one tyrant with another." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Humanity's offering aid to any world that requests it. Food, medicine, technology, assistance in rebuilding. We ask nothing in return, except a simple promise that you will never do to others what was done to us. We are also proposing a new alliance, the Galactic Compact, a treaty of mutual defense and cooperation. Any species that signs agrees to never attack civilian populations, to settle disputes through negotiation, and to help defend member worlds against aggression. If you want peace, we offer peace. If you want partnership, we offer partnership. The choice is yours." The response was overwhelming. Species that had cowered under Valorian rule for centuries reached out eagerly. 12 civilizations signed the compact in the first month, then 20, then 50. Within a year, the number had risen to 8 or 4. Former Valorian subjects found themselves receiving aid from the very species they had been taught to despise. Human engineers helped rebuild destroyed infrastructure. Human doctors treated diseases that had been ignored by Valorian authorities. Human teachers established schools on worlds where education had been forbidden. The galaxy began to change. On Earth, the victory was celebrated, but the celebration was muted. Too many had died. Too much had been lost. The people knew that their species had proven capable of terrible destruction, and that knowledge weighed on them. They had won, but they had done so by becoming something they were not sure they wanted to be. Director Lena Vasquez retired from public service 6 months after the war ended. She spent her remaining years establishing the Europa Memorial Foundation, an organization dedicated to funding scientific research and education in memory of those who had died. Every year, on the anniversary of the attack, she traveled to the ruins of Europa and read the names of the victims aloud. All 3 million of them. It took several days. She never missed one. Admiral Chen continued to serve until his body could no longer keep up with his spirit. He became a symbol of humanity's military might, but he never forgot the cost. At every memorial ceremony, every graduation speech, every public appearance, he said the same thing. We proved that we could destroy. Now we must prove that we can build. That is the harder task. That is the more important one. Captain Sarah Okonkwo took command of the Remembrance for another decade. She led peacekeeping missions, rescue operations, and diplomatic escorts. She never fired another weapon in anger. When she finally retired, she returned to Earth and spent her days by the ocean, watching the waves roll in, thinking of her daughter who had loved the sea. The galaxy remembered the fall of the Valorian Dominion as a turning point. Before humanity arrived, the strong preyed on the weak without consequence. After humanity, there was another way. Not perfect, not without conflict, but different. On the anniversary of Europa's destruction, a memorial was constructed in orbit around the shattered moon. 3 million lights, one for each soul lost, arranged in patterns that could be seen from Earth on clear nights. Ships from across the compact traveled there every year to pay their respects. Species that had never met humanity before came to understand what the lights represented, not just death, not just grief, but the moment when a young species decided that some things were worth any price, the moment when they showed the universe that kindness and strength could exist together, the moment when they proved that you could destroy your enemies and then help rebuild their worlds. A Valorian historian, writing centuries later, tried to explain what had gone wrong. His conclusion was simple. We saw a species that valued peace. We saw a species that preferred negotiation. We saw a species that seemed soft and divided and weak. We saw all of this, and we concluded that they could be bullied. We were wrong. We mistook their patience for fear. We mistook their restraint for inability. We struck them in their hearts, and we awakened something that should have been left sleeping. They did not fight us because they wanted to rule the galaxy. They fought us because we gave them no choice. And when they finished, they showed us more mercy than we had ever shown anyone. That mercy was the greater defeat. We could have understood conquerors. We could have respected tyrants. But they were neither. They were simply human. And that was something we never learned to be. The lights of Europa still burn in the darkness. 3 million souls watching over a galaxy that learned a simple lesson. Do not mistake kindness for weakness. Do not confuse patience with fear. And never ever harm what humans love. They will forgive almost anything. But they will forget nothing. And they will always, always make you answer for the innocent blood you spilled.